This is going to feel strange because I've been at the Quorum and I know exactly how wonderful that setting is for deep conversations. The mood, the ambience is pretty perfect. But let's hope this conversation is going to, make up for the lack of ambience or atmosphere that the Quorum would actually bring if we were there physically. Parmesh, you haven't been there, so let me tell you that you're missing out. As soon as you're able to travel, you should try and go there.
I'd love to. The moment all this is over.
Okay. We're going to get into we're going to dive into the book, but I want to start by saying that in any conversation about the LGBTQ community, about the issues of decriminalizing homosexuality, about the rights for the LGBTQ community, it starts by everybody you talk to having to identify themselves by their sexual orientation and also their gender identity. So I think it's fair, Parmesh, do you think that people who are not LGBTQ also identify themselves with their sexual identity, sexual orientation and gender identity? Do you think that's fair? And in that case, should I say that I'm cisgender, heterosexual? Is that the right way of introducing myself?
Yes, for sure. And I think over the past few years, there's been a renewed understanding of the entire spectrum of gender and sexuality. In fact, in the book, Queeristan, which we'll be discussing, I have a whole chapter called the LGBTQ alphabet soup. And I lay out a range of terms that we can call ourselves, whether it's lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, heterosexual, which is also a term. Or the whole range of indigenous terms, Hijra, Kothi, Aravani, and so on. And the whole point is, whatever term we choose, it's really comforting to find a term in which you actually fit. Many people say there are so many terms, it's confusing. I don't think it's confusing. I think it's wonderful that we have abundance. And in this abundance, if you can find a word that fits for what you feel, whether in terms of gender or sexuality,
you should pick it up, pluck it out.
Or use a whole bunch of terms, because I'm a maximalist. In terms of Madonna, something's better than nothing, but nothing's better than more. So pick a few terms. And I think it's always good to start a conversation by saying, I'm Anuradha, I'm cis, I'm het, my preferred pronouns are she, her, and so on. And there might be someone else who might want, who may wish to use other pronouns as well.
But do you feel that the heterosexual community or people who claim to be part of the heterosexual community, do you think that there is an advantage that you're not constantly having to identify yourself or even to yourself and definitely to others through this lens? Do you think that's an advantage which is denied to the LGBTQ community?
I think it's just the world in which we operate, right? I mean, that's heteronormativity for you. Operate in a world in which, something seems to be the norm. And when something seems to be the norm or the majority, it's assumed that would be, that would not need an explanation. In the US, for example, the norm might be whiteness. So race is looked at through the lens of non-whiteness. Which is silly because, white people are also a race. But when people think of racism, so it's the same, right? When people think of sexuality, they would think of LGBTQ and not heterosexuality. One of the things we get as queer people is, why do you talk about it? Why do you wear it on your sleeve so much? Why is it important? But the truth is, as a heterosexual person, you are talking about it too all the time. It's just that
you think it's normal and we take it for granted and as a right.
Correct.
And we deny you yours, isn't it?
Or you live in a world in which that is assumed the norm. And so something that might be different, you notice. My straight friends talk about their wives, their children, various aspects of their heterosexuality all the time. If this was a world in which there were more queer people than straight people, I would point it out to them. But, so I think that's the thing. But what we want to move into a world in which we all can express ourselves. We all can choose, the terms that we want to call ourselves. and we all can respect each other.
So in short, you want to move towards Queeristan, the
Correct.
dreamlike world of equality that you aspire to and co-create with your actions. Parmesh,
Yes.
2018, that Supreme Court verdict that turned its own previous verdict of 2013 ended up decriminalizing homosexuality for good forever. When you look at the 2 years since, do you think we've come a really long way in those 2 years? Have things changed a lot for the LGBTQ community on the ground? How long is this road to what you call Queeristan?
So I think we've come a long way for sure, because there's so many exciting changes that have taken place. And this verdict was very important. It came on the heels of two other very important verdicts. One was the 2014 NALSA verdict, which was very progressive for transgender rights, correct? And the other was the 2017 right to privacy verdict.
Yeah.
So 2018 was built on both these.
Yes.
And when you look at the 2013 verdict, which was terrible, I think 2018 was facilitated by these two progressive judgments. So it's true that it's led to decriminalization, but there is not full equality at all. Just some examples. The spirit of the 2014 NALSA judgment has resulted in a not so good transgender act. The Trans Act, which is which is a law right now, is deeply problematic. So that has to change to reflect the aspirations and actually the lived realities of our trans citizens. We have a verdict which decriminalizes us, but we don't have anti-discrimination laws. And certainly queer people don't have the same rights, whether it is right to marriage, whether it is right to, inheritance, adoption.
Yeah.
So many of these other rights, queer people do not have as compared to their heterosexual counterparts. Whereas we pay taxes, we are decent citizens, and we're about 5 to 10% of the population. So certainly there's a long road that needs to be traversed.
And 5 to 10% of the population in the Indian context would be several 100 million people, isn't it?
Of course. And which is why in this book I write about how it's also a market. It's a market which is worth $200 billion for anyone who wants to come and get it. And I would assume that a lot of people want this market.
So a lot of things have changed. The big change is that you do not have to live with that awful, I can't even begin to imagine what that fear is of having to be in jail because of who you choose to make love to or be in love with. Having said that, that is the big shift psychologically. What has that resulted in? How has that changed things? And then what else has not changed, even though this fear has now been laid to rest?
So a lot hasn't changed, but let me tell you about what has, right? So one of the things that excites me most is the incredible organizing that's happening across small towns in the country, everywhere. If you look, some of the most exciting pride marches are in places like Raipur. Raipur has an incredible pride march in Chhattisgarh. Some of the most exciting queer events are events like the Awadh Queer Literature Festival that flourishes in Lucknow. Some of the most incredible organizations are organizations like Zukia in Assam, Ya All in Manipur, Grace Banu and her Trans Rights Now collective in Tamil Nadu. In fact, last week they inaugurated an incredible community with land given by the collector, cows given by the government, houses built. So it's like a transgender run cooperative farming community, right? Incredible stuff is happening all around.
Are you saying that this would be not so visible? These would not be so visible or so unequivocal in their presence as before 2018?
Certainly, because while I think 2018 going away unleashed an incredible amount of positive energy across the board. And I work in the corporate world, but even otherwise, whether it's state governments, whether it is businesses, I think it has empowered a lot of people to actually go out there and create these infrastructures of possibility. I was telling you small towns, I was telling you parent groups which are coming together and creating support groups. So many queer champions are coming out more and more, whether it's a Duti Chand, whether it's a Natraj. We're seeing beginnings of a political engagement. And, I write in the book, citing the Pink List India, about how across the political spectrum, while, there's mostly ignorance, but having said that, there are voices which are speaking up across the political spectrum, whether it's Supriya Sule of NCP, whether it's Kani Mozi of BJP, whether it is Gautam Gambhir of BJP. Of course, Shashi Tharoor has always spoken up for LGBTQ rights from the Congress and so on. So I'm actually seeing incredible energy. And my hope is that this positive LGBTQ friendly India that we all are seeing the beginnings of is something that is supported by others. It's not something that we queer people can create by ourselves. We need allies, we need support to move into this inclusion world together.
So you mentioned Duti Chand. I recorded a conversation with her in 2019. I've had the privilege, I consider myself, I hope, I hope you see me, because I consider myself as an ally, using whatever space I've had in my journalistic work to be able to have conversations where you can actually probe, ask without being judged, and build bridges. So interestingly, I had a conversation with Wendell Rodrigues, beautiful man. When the Delhi High Court judgment that first decriminalized 377 happened, I had a conversation with Dev that when the 2018 judgment came in. I met Duti Chand in 2019 when she declared that she was lesbian. Would you say, Parmesh, there is a generational shift in the way people are dealing with being LGBTQ? Because I was just blown away with how matter-of-fact Duti was about the fact that she was lesbian, she was in love with another woman. She was just, it was no, I'm not saying that she must not have had to deal with it, but she definitely seemed like she was more than able to be comfortable in her skin where it came to her sexual orientation.
Completely. And, today's young people are not asking for society's permission. They're just saying, this is who we are. We love ourselves. We have accepted ourselves. We are happening to share it with you. It's incredible. So there is certainly a generational shift. There's also a shift in terms of how young people are understanding their sexuality in terms of intersectionality.
Yeah.
So a lot of what excites me about the queer movement today are these organizations which are coming up, whether it's Dalit Queer Project, whether it's Queer Muslim Project, whether it's Shinki Homo Project. I mean, there's incredible queer organizations which are all youth-run, youth-empowered, which are talking about how queerness intersects with other identities, right? How does building solidarity, say, between LGBTQ rights and other rights, whether the environment, whether Black Lives Matter in other parts of the world?
Since you've talked about it quite a lot in your book, it is personal for large parts. You've built on your own experience. How much of a change is it generationally, even with yours and let's say someone who is, in their 20s?
I mean, I'm 44 and I already feel like a dinosaur when I talk to so many of the young queers. I'm deeply envious. I'm envious of their confidence. I'm envious of their wisdom and knowledge. I'm envious of their resources. When I was articulating my own sexuality to my own self. I grew up in a pre-internet India, right?
Yeah.
To find that word gay in a dictionary, to go to libraries, I was yearning, I was thirsting for context, because I could find even books or movies, etc. It would be Western, which is why I'm so grateful to the early pioneers, whether it's R. Raj Rao, whether it's Ruth Vanita and Salim Kidwai, Maya Sharma, so many of these early writers, scholars, filmmakers like Oner or Riyad Wadia, who made this work so that we could kind of find these reference points of what it meant to be queer in an Indian context. And the young generation today has not just queer what it means to be a pan-Indian context, it's what does it mean to be queer in Kannada? What does it mean to be queer in Maharashtrian? And, it's incredible. So, there's a generational shift. it's confidence, it's assertion, it's wisdom.
And yet they have battles to wage as well.
Oh, completely, right? Because young queers are articulate and young queers understand and they're wise, but we're still being governed by people in, whether it's in colleges, whether it's in companies, whether it's, state governments and so on, by people who are more establishment, who may not have, who are quite ignorant about queer lives, about queer aspirations. So yeah, there's great challenges. But having said that, what I like is what young activists like Grace Banu and others are doing. They're working with the collector. They're working on creating these win-win scenarios. So I think that's also something which is quite exciting. How can you collaborate with the business world, the not-for-profit world, the state, and come up with solutions that can benefit everyone? I don't think in my generation we had that understanding that you can work across silos. We would think very binary. So I'm learning a lot. I mean, I'm just inspired from, and I'm learning a lot.
So, I want to talk about the role of, of culture so we had the legal battle and a big legal milestone that was achieved in 2018. I want to quickly, there's so many other things to do to get to Queeristan or to creating Queeristan, but that's a tongue twister, and I'm sure you're enjoying. Everybody's stumbling over it, Parmesh. Why do I get a feeling that you're loving it?
Call it whatever you want. Kuch bhi khaho, lekin pyar se bulao bas.
Acha, theek hai, pyar se bulao. So here's the thing, that there is so much work to be done, and there are many challenges to be overcome. But I want to quickly talk about the zeitgeist, the culture of the times, and what role that plays or has played in helping the LGBTQ community and in helping larger society understand, relate, and include. Okay, and in this context, I want to pick up several movies, but because you begin your book with Naseeb, Hema Malini. You want to just hum a bit of that song? You remember it?
Oh, of course.
Go on.
Mere naseeb mein tu hai ke nahi. This is, of course, she's coming down in a big basket, in a black sheet with a pink boa. Feather boa. I mean, the scarf, not the snake. So it's gorgeous. I mean, of course I have to begin. I mean,
I think she had a fringe.
Yes, she had a fringe.
She had a fringe, exactly. So, Naseeb and you relating to Hema Malini, and the movies and the role they've played. But I want to go to Dostana, made by Dharma Productions. Karan Johar is the producer. I remember seeing it and feeling quite troubled by it and quite disturbed, saying, you're making a mockery. And I couldn't understand why Karan would have backed that. And then I spoke to a gay colleague, and I happened to have that conversation in 2009 with Wendell when I brought it up. And he said, there are problems, but it's actually a good thing. You subscribe to that view, don't you?
Completely. I think Dostana is a landmark film. Certainly it's problematic, but for the time it came out. And in the book, I talk about, Genet's idea of text, subtext, and paratext, right? With text being what, the film says explicitly. Subtext is what is unsaid, but what they want to say. And paratext are everything surrounding that product. So the design, the cover, the media, the conversations around it, right? At a text level, certainly it was problematic. Two men pretending to be gay to win. They're not gay at all.
And to elicit laughter in the audience.
Correct. Right? So a lot of the laughter in Dostana was at their gayness, in a sense, right?
Yeah.
But what is the subtext of the film? The subtext of the film is Kiran Kher's character. A mother.
And the acceptance that she provides.
And a mother who goes on this journey of saying, I don't understand, but let me try and make sense of it, and goes on this journey of acceptance. Now, that was revolutionary. I can't tell you how many queer people use that film to come out to their parents and said, if this mother can get it, maybe you can as well. Maybe you don't understand. Maybe you don't have the language, but see how she's loving her child, right? And then it was the paratext of the fact that Dostana came And we had so many conversations about what it is to be gay in India. Incidentally, that same Kiran Kher's character, there are real life characters like that mother. It's not just films, it's TV. Satyamev Jayate. Historic episode in which Ghazal Dhaliwal's parents say, we embrace our child. So many, so many episodes. I mean, there were so many on NDTV, for example, say in Barkha's show, where she would have, Sambhav's Dadi, this iconic Dadi ji, who would come on TV all the time and say, I love my child, and why is society not allowing my grandchild to be with the person of, their choice? And you see the same parental arc comes true in our media today. So what's interesting is in Dostana, the audience is laughing at the gay couple. Some years later, you reach and ek ladki ko dekha, and then Shubh Mangal Savdhan. Shubh Mangal Jada Savdhan, the audience is laughing at the parents. Because the first 10 minutes of the film you've established, it's a gay couple, they kiss, they're happy. We as the audience are on their side. Now we have to laugh at the parents who cannot understand. So the whole film is, the director is making fun of homophobia. I think it's incredible that within a decade,
that you managed to go that.
We've gone this. And Shubh Mangal Jada Savdhan was also a super hit. So we are having super hit films.
So Parmesh, would you say that Karan Johar has done a lot for the LGBTQ community in sort of normalizing their aspirations, their desires, without having to actually come out and say anything about his own identity?
I think, I write about this in the book. I think Karan's persona is incredible on TV shows in so many places. He may or may not, it's completely his prerogative what he wants to share with the world. But I think certainly through by sharing himself with the world, by the films that he has produced, by the advice that he gives. There was he has a Netflix show in which he's giving very sensible advice to a young queer person. His radio shows, everything. I think Karan is a very important figure in terms of laying the ground. And I think if we see now, right, all the Dharma films were relevant to their times. If we see this next wave of Dharma films that are coming out over the next 10 or 15 years, I think you're going to see way more explicit, more confident queerness being articulated in these films as well, as we are going to see in so many other cultural products, because nothing succeeds like success. When you have a Shubh Mangal Jada Savdhan making money and Ayushmann playing it, when you have a Made in Heaven, when you have a 4 More Shots Please, season 2 is a completely lesbian season. When all of this is happening, people are watching it. That's the way it works. And culture is a huge shifter. So,
and perhaps more effective in terms of the long-term changes and implications that it has than the law, isn't it?
But culture also influences the law. Because why do we think that our High Court and Supreme Court judges don't watch TV? Or don't read newspaper columns or don't see your show? They're living in this society, right?
That circularity you talk about?
Yeah, completely. I talk about circularity in the sense of urban versus rural, and I think that it shouldn't be versus. It should be think about, in general, this oppositional thing I find no use of in today's world. I prefer things like the hyphen or the circle, which to me are a way more productive way of looking at things. We are connected.
So, so we've got decriminalization, we've got culture shifting to include and to tell stories of the LGBTQ community, which it hasn't done effectively enough. Now tell me, what do you think, what are the things that you need next? Especially given that even as we are having this conversation today, we know that the Delhi High Court will hear again in October these petitions of PIL asking for the regularization or the legalization of same-sex marriages. And we also know what the government or the central government's view on the matter is in court, isn't it? So those, marriage, adoption, property rights, are those rights now going to be easy to access, or do you think those are going to be other long battles that have to be waged?
So I actually think that we have to stop thinking of LGBTQ rights as something that are linear and that we have to argue for one by one. I think, and Mona El Tahawi, who's a friend and an incredible Egyptian American feminist author, shared this with me. She said, in the context of feminism, she said, for years, women have been used to the crumbs. And so it seems that all we were struggling for were crumbs. It's like, we have to say, we don't want crumbs. We want a slice of the cake. Can it be a big slice? Can we bake a bigger cake that we can all eat? So it's the same with LGBTQ rights, right? I don't think that we should have one right after the other. Straight people are not having one right and then after some years another right and all, no? They're paying taxes. We're also doing all of that. So why should we have our rights in like some sequence and wait for years for each right? I disagree. I think we're going to see now the struggle for equality, like with feminism, like with the struggle for gender equality. I think we're going to see in the struggle for LGBT equality, it's being played out on multiple fields. As I said earlier, we have to change the Trans Act. It has to be modified. We need comprehensive anti-discrimination legislation. And certainly marriage is something which is of deep emotional significance to a lot of Indians, straight and queer. So much of, of our identity, so much of our imagination of what happiness is. Now, this is quite problematic too, I must say, but it is based on this idea of romance and marriage and things like that. Certainly mine. And here I blame, Yash Raj and Dharma completely for like the kind of films that I watched growing up, even the Barjatias. I mean, I've grown up watching these films. So my imagination of romance is this. And so with my partner, I want the drama. And then when he says, I was like, sorry, this is what I... So I think marriage is certainly something which has deep emotional significance and resonance. And also it has material benefits, right? Because in terms of...
the security that comes
with the inheritance, things like that. So I think the change is going to happen. Is it going to be easy or not? Is it going to be a long or short process? Now, these are all things that will play themselves out. But certainly, we are in the direction of change on multiple fronts. Keshav Suri, my friend, says, why should we not have gay marriage and then gay divorce? Or, queer marriage and queer divorce. In that sense, we want all the rights, and you
feel confident that we are set toward in this direction, and that direction has been set, because for instance, we are also, politically, socially today, we have swung extreme right. We are talking about Hindutva politics. We're talking about a Hindutva-led society. We know what the RSS, which is the custodian of Hindutva, had to say, when the verdict came out. They said they were okay with decriminalization, but they didn't really feel very comfortable with, or they didn't feel, I'm not sure, I have a note somewhere, but the whole idea was that they didn't feel that this was natural, even if they were okay with the Supreme Court's decision to decriminalize homosexuality. So will the right and will the Hindutva right be a huge obstruction, barrier to actual rights for the queer community?
I'm a big believer in engagement, in conversations, in persuasion, in what in what Devdutt calls samvad. So I actually think that with every political party, the queer movement and its various forms will have to engage. And we are seeing this. I mean, we are seeing that this is happening in some places or the other, right? I mean, there is engagement. I think here, the trans citizens of our country are way ahead in terms of this engagement. So a lot of the progress is coming in terms of trans rights, at least at a state level. You look at Kerala, you look at Tamil Nadu, you look at Maharashtra, which I think 2 months ago set up a transgender welfare board. You look at Chhattisgarh, for example. So I think then over the next few years, there has to be a deeper engagement, in terms of queer rights with governments and political parties across the spectrum. And there has to be an attempt to actually share aspirations, dreams, perspectives with everyone. So now what will that result in? I don't know, but I certainly think that we will have to make that attempt.
It seems so strange that you have to still fight for these rights. At some level, it's just something that I cannot relate to. My entire understanding or idea of the queer community, though I didn't know those words then, was as a teenager who happened to have a British Council reading membership, happened to have totally, a laissez-faire approach to pick up a book and figure out what you want to read. And I stumbled upon what serendipity. Christopher Isherwood's A Single Man, and I mean, when you read people's stories, when you hear your story, anybody's stories of their lived experiences, you wonder how a majoritarian society can, just be so cruel. Why is this even an issue? It boggles my mind sometimes.
But herein lies the solution also, right? So which is why the path ahead is going to be about these stories. I have many friends who are conservative, but when they read the story of how Kusuma, who is a person, who's someone in my book, who's a friend in Bangalore and works at Intuit, how when she comes out to her mother has studied, maybe not even crossed 10 standard and only speaks Kannada. But when they see the love of that mother for embracing their child, they understand that love is love. So I think a lot of this samvad, this discussion, this persuasion, this dialogue has to be through stories, as you rightly said. I mean, there's no other way. We have to create frameworks where we can share with others that what we have in terms of our commonality is so much more than our differences. Mm-hmm. What LGBTQ people are asking for are essentially the same rights as other people have: the right to be oneself, the right to love. So I think, and to answer your question of, it feels strange that we have to struggle for these.
That you've had to struggle for so long.
But look at gender. I mean, look at feminism, right? I mean, feminism is a project that has been so many decades now.
That's true.
And it feels strange in 2020 that, say in the business world in which we live in and operate, how many senior level board positions are filled by women? Not more than 10% in even good companies.
And mandated by law, isn't it?
So it is strange, but I'm of the school of thought that roll your sleeves up, say this is the world I want to create, and try your best to create it. And that's what I'm trying to do.
Okay, Parmesh, one quick question, and then I'm going to go to the manifesto part of this conversation and your book, definitely. And that question is, you talked about feminism. We are hearing this battle, the social media battle that J.K. Rowling is fighting. We are hearing about TERF. You explain that in the book. Do you want to just weigh in on what is happening there? Because I'm a little confused. Not fully confused, but a little confused.
See, so J.K. Rowling has a particular understanding. So there's a term, TERF, trans exclusionary radical feminist. The understanding of gender is, has over the years expanded. And there are a lot of people like J.K. Rowling who might feel uncomfortable, say, very broadly with including trans women into the spectrum of women. So it's trans exclusionary. And their feeling is that for years we have fought for women's rights. Trans people, again, trans is a spectrum, right? They don't feel comfortable sharing the space of womanhood with trans people. Now, this is, to me, it's a problematic view. It's not a nuanced understanding of gender, at least in terms of how gender should be understood. But the way I deal with J.K. Rowling is I also look at the good that her books have done. For example, there's a term in the book called cultural acupuncture. It comes from a group of Harry Potter fans who use the Harry Potter universe to imagine and create real world change in their own localities and societies, right? So I would distance J.K. Rowling's personal beliefs or thoughts, which I don't agree with myself, from the universe that she has created, which so many queer people are using as a positive force to bring about change. And that's my stand on
that.
Yeah.
Okay. So Parmesh, let's move to the manifesto part of the book, because I think you've really, thanks to your experience at Godrej, which I want you to talk about, in a little bit, but you have worked at figuring out how companies and why companies should be inclusive. There's one bit in the book which I find really nails that argument, especially in the context of our country, our society, and the way we are as a people. Would you want to read that? It's I think it's page 55.
Yes, I think I know the bit you're referring to. It's actually a bit where I describe how I go on a visit, and I do this now. I mean, I don't do physical visits anymore. It's mostly Zoom calls. But pre-COVID, I visit a lot of companies and talk to them about LGBTQ inclusion. And this is one visit where I visit Franklin Templeton in Mumbai. And here goes. In most countries, one negotiates their identity at home and not at work. In our country, where the home itself is a space of identity erasure, the negotiation starts at the workplace. Just think, dear HR managers, who I hope are reading this book, who is your employee? Someone who has been writing exams their whole life? Maybe they did well in class 10 and then in class 12. Pressure from their parents and peers may have forced them to sit for the JEE. Whether they got into IIT or not, they got in somewhere. Completed an engineering degree that they, like most others, would not have used. Then they sat for another set of exams to appear for their MBA. Again, whether they got into an IIM or not, they got in somewhere.
Yeah.
Finally, at some point in their mid-20s, the lucky ones are working in corporate India alongside you. When these young employees come into your system, I told my Franklin Templeton audience, they're not fully developed. They know how to mug up, write exams, and pass tests. They often sacrificed a lot in their quest to emerge from the narrow end of the funnel into your organization. And this includes sacrificing things like their own identity or what makes them happy or what gives them purpose in life. Your workplace needs to welcome them to explore their multiple selves. You need to reassure them that it is okay to be who they are. Here, that they can engage with the identities which they often tend to suppress at home. As a consequence, an Indian corporate structure for an Indian LGBTQ person needs to be a space for reconciliation. Your policies need to be about caregiving because you are supplementing broken infrastructures and an aching lack of information. And I'm going to stop right here.
I think,
yeah.
Parmesh, that sort of, and I know this case and this concept of reconciliation and providing information and helping people, understand what their identities are, is with the queer community in mind. And yet this could be true of any young Indian, isn't it?
Yeah.
And therefore, in that context, and definitely specifically in the context of the queer community, the workplace has to play a very, very critical and a very, very sensitive role, isn't it?
I mean, I say in loco parentis, and that's what it is. I think the workplace, you have to think, because this is not America where you find yourself and go to, I mean, in other parts of the world, you find yourself at home or you find yourself in college, you take multiple classes and you find yourself. We don't find ourselves in India. Mm-hmm. We just give exams and enter the world.
Yeah.
So then what? Then workplace has to be that space. You're finding yourself after you've got a job. And if you don't create that kind of atmosphere, I mean, it's lose-lose. Whereas if you create that atmosphere, it's win-win. Mm-hmm. The employee it becomes an amazing, all-rounded, confident, secure, loyal employee who loves you because you've created that space. You get the benefit of the money, the innovation, everything else. Everyone wins.
So talk a little bit about the experience you've had at Godrej and how did that happen? You've credited Nisaba Godrej with, sort of being the wind beneath your, in your sails, of providing that kind of role, playing that kind of role in your life, in your professional life. Give us an idea of why, what happened at Godrej. What is it that allowed you in that work environment, in that corporate entity, to be able to create a paradigm for inclusion for the queer community, which are now actually going, to other companies and to industry bodies and advocating for?
So I think we're still very early on our Godrej journey. Our intent is there. We've done a few things, right? But I think we are far from complete. So I don't want anyone listening to this to think that we are, we are on the right path. We are in the right direction. But there's still so much to learn, and that's what all the companies who are trying to be inclusive organizations are doing together, right? But with us, the way it began was when I joined Godrej as an out and proud gay employee. I just asked Nisa, who's my boss, and Sumit, who heads HR. I was like, what are the policies and benefits you have for LGBTQ employees? And they said, we don't know. So I said, do you have an anti-discrimination clause or whatever? They said, we don't know. And so we looked and we realized that, say the anti-discrimination clause said we shan't discriminate against anyone on the basis of caste, class, creed, race, etc. But there was no sexual orientation, gender display, and so on, right? So I was like, this is not acceptable. And they said, we agree. So, I mean, it was an important realization. And I say this to all the young people. I speak a lot at colleges and at workplaces. I say, if you want to start making an inclusive organization, maybe you just need to ask that question instead of being fearful that, will the organization be homophobic? Sometimes the organization is just ignorant and they've not thought about it. And they've not thought about it because no one's asked. And no one's asked because organizations tend to be similar. And which is why you need diversity. You need diversity so that more and more people ask these questions, and then you create a more diverse organization.
So while you make the point that there is still more that you can do, what are some of the things that you all have done at Godrej?
Sure. So we have the full suite, starting with anti-discrimination, widening the range of POSH to include all genders, partnership, same-sex partnership benefit in terms of health insurance and so many other things. Gender affirmation. We pay for gender affirmation surgery if any employee is trans and wants to avail of surgery. And that includes a certain fixed amount up to your insurance amount, as well as an annual amount for hormones. So there's a bunch of things that one has done at a policy level. A lot more work needs to be done in terms of sensitization, in terms of the workshops, in terms of the existing managers. Whenever something happens, Godrej, always steps forward. So if there's a job fair, we will go and be at the job fair. If there's a LGBTQ film festival, we will sponsor it or participate in some way. So we've tried to engage a lot with the queer ecosystem, which is being built all around, which is something that I advocate a lot for any organization which is interested, right? I said, you don't need to reinvent the wheel. There are already, if you want to hire queer people, there are 10 consultants out there who are already placing queer people, right? Periphery in Chennai and so many others. Engage them. You want to do diversity sensitization training? There are 20 organizations which are set up.
No, you do mention the fact that is this are organizations, when you offer all these benefits or privileges, if you want to use those words, you could be sort of favoring them in a sense, favoring the queer community. And I'm sure that this is a question that HR managers and HR practitioners would ask about, these are facilities for the queer community. What about the other guys? What do we offer them? I know you have something to say here, so go ahead and say it.
Well, I think I love HR managers, and I love working with them to show them their unconscious biases, to guide them on the right path. And queer people are not asking for something extra. We're just asking for the same rights that straight people have, right? Sometimes it's biological. When you offer maternity benefits to someone because she happens to be able to carry a child, and then after childbirth needs that time, right? I'm sure for years people argued over things like that as well. But then understanding changes and that becomes a norm. Likewise, if you're offering, gender affirmation is the same thing, right? It's a vital part of someone. You are creating, you're offering these to enable that person to be, to feel comfortable. And ultimately, it rewards you, right? So companies don't think when we offer a maternity leave of 6 months, do they think it's a 6-month waste?
Actually, the thing is, Parmesh, I hate to say this, it's mandated and they do it, but I think many companies still have problems with it.
Maybe we reach a point where, some of this is mandated and then it becomes a norm.
Yeah.
My point is, look, anytime you try and change the status quo, and I write about this in the book, there will always be someone who will stand up and give this dialogue. And the dialogue normally goes, let me play devil's advocate for a minute. I'm sure you've heard this dialogue. So many good ideas are killed at this altar of someone wanting to play devil's advocate for a minute. And then you derail the whole damn meeting. And then it gets pushed 6 months down the line. So I just tell people, you don't need to play devil's advocate. Devil does not need any advocates. But what I'm suggesting right now is that you do this now. Try it out. It's really no loss. When you break it down, giving someone gender affirmation, the company doesn't have to do anything. Your insurer will pay for it. And you are anyway paying for group insurance. And your insurer knows very well. It's not like there will be thousands of trans people who will suddenly join you and who will suddenly take gender affirmation. So your insurance premiums also need not go up. Now, all the insurance in a country know it. When you ask for it, you get it. So many companies don't ask, so they don't get. So when you are doing these efforts, nothing extra is going out of your pocket. Honestly, you're doing it because it's truly win-win. And if something extra also happens to go, for example, what is the harm?
What is the harm? Absolutely. So tell do you think they should see it as reparation besides just what is the harm?
No, I think companies who are doing this should see this as something which is entirely going to benefit them. It is going to make them more money. It is going to help them become more innovative. It is going to attract talent. It is going to help them get out of COVID into this new normal or better normal. You cannot get into a better normal without innovative people who will, who will help you. So, yeah.
So, the thing is that it's very apparent to me, and I'm guessing anybody who's watching, that I'm not a businesswoman, because you got me with the case you made on page 55. Okay. but
the people who are reading this book,
but to the hardcore people, the people who run businesses, who have to look at the bottom line, you are making a case for this investment as an investment for their own commercial good, isn't it? So elaborate on that.
Which is why we should stop looking at this as altruism, or okay, we are doing such a good thing, or oh, look, we hired a queer person, we should feel so good. You hired a queer person because it's benefiting you. So I think, of course, it's a decent thing to do, to be inclusive as a person, as a family, as an organization. But truly, it is in your benefit. It's in your economic benefit and so many other benefits. And I'm not saying this. Goldman Sachs is saying this. BCG is saying this. Deloitte is saying this. McKinsey is saying this. And there's enough data that I use. For example, Deloitte Australia says that when you are inclusive, your innovation output at your company increases by 8 times, 8x, not 8%.
Yeah, 8 times.
So why would you not want an 8x increase innovation input? Even if you're thoda sa homophobic, be quiet and achieve the benefits, no? The Indian queer market is $200 billion. Now, who wants a piece of this? I'm sure people who are watching this would love a piece of this. The global queer market is $5 trillion. Kisko chahiye? It's consumers, it's employees, it's everything. So it's truly win-win. Now, do I feel comfortable arguing in terms of money for something that is a basic human right?
Absolutely. That's
No.
that's my question.
No, but this is the world we're living in. And this is also the truth. The truth is, it's obviously it should be a decent thing to do. So if you were sold on page 55, I'm very happy. But there will be other readers who might come to page 300 and then realize it. The point is, I've just put it as it is, right? I've just said, to me, it's a no-brainer. I've been studying this for a while. Whichever way you look at it, I mean, there's no benefit to not include. I mean, that's the truth.
So in your wide experience of different companies, and not, companies in different sectors, so it could be consumer products, fast moving consumer goods, heavy metal industries, different, the new age industries, the digital businesses. When you look across the spectrum of business, especially through industry bodies which you participate in, when you talk to people directly into their companies, like you talk to Franklin Templeton in that little bit you read out, where do you see the most change happening? Where do you see the most inclusion happening? And where do you see the problems or the barriers?
I think you will be surprised. This is as true as it is for our families, as it is for our companies. We assume that if your family is urban, that you live in Bombay or Delhi, you will be more inclusive than if you are in Jabalpur. That need not be true. We would assume that if it's a foreign company, a foreign-owned global company, you might be more inclusive than a Desi company. That need not be true as well, right? We assume that if you're a software if you're an Infi or a Google, you'll be more inclusive than maybe an industrial company. That's not true. India's first, and this is an important case study in my book, India is one of India's most LGBTQ inclusive companies, is Tata Steel. And they started their inclusion journey from Jamshedpur, not even from Calcutta, certainly not from Bombay, from Jamshedpur, where Anubhuti Banerjee, who is, whose story I talk about in the book, came out, transitioned, and then Tata Steel went on this incredible journey, starting with Jamshedpur. So I think our imagination need not be. Some of the most inclusive parents I have met don't speak English or didn't go to an English medium school. Some of the most homophobic people I have met, on the other hand, might have gone to HBS. So, there's no correlation between size. There's no correlation between, even I do these webinars with FICCI, with CII, with All India Management Association. Some of the most incredible comments and case studies I hear are from small towns that you would never imagine. And in terms of what they are doing, how they're thinking things through, right? And some of the silliest comments I hear are from like big managers of multinationals. So I don't think you can paint, you can generalize. I think that the only categories you can put people in, like with parents, are there good parents and are there bad parents? Good parents love, bad parents think about log kya kahenge, their own ego and all of things, everything except the well-being of their children. Likewise, I think there are good companies and bad companies. Good companies care and understand that it is in their interest and their employees' interest for them to be inclusive. Bad companies care about short-term things. And then very clearly through history, we have shown that companies which are not inclusive, which do not think about, the long-term, don't survive.
Okay, Parmesh, I think, I think Angad will have questions from people who've joined in. So I'm going to, Angad, you want to just cue us with those questions, or should I hand it over to you? But while you're getting ready, Angad, I want people to know that I feature in Parmesh's book. So you want to tell people why?
Yeah, so this is actually a chapter that comes towards the end for those who cross page 55. And it's a chapter called But No Token Rainbows, Please, right? And I'm kind of bugged in this chapter. Yeah. So I'm generally optimistic, but this chapter I'm thoda sa bugged. Because I talk about all the different things that one can do in terms, I take people through all these various steps, right? Policies, benefits, advocacy, etc. And I end by saying, what we need are your jobs. We don't need your rainbow Instagram filters. So, because what we have seen now is all these companies come out suddenly, once a year. Some Pride Day will happen. They will all have rainbow filters. They will all do cool social media advertising. They all want to go viral. But if you just check about their own HR policies or how they treat their customers or whatever, you will hear the truth. So you come in that chapter. um, in a good way. And I've seen this advertisement for Nor soup, which has Karan in it. And while I admire Karan very much, I don't like the character he has played in this ad.
Yeah.
Because I don't, we've seen the ad.
Yeah.
It's a person. Karan is playing himself. The doorbell rings. It's a hot neighbor. It's a hot male neighbor. Karan gets interested, enthused, and the neighbor wants soup. So then Karan is like, "Oh, you only want soup? Theek hai." And then at the end of the ad, the neighbor is like, "Karan," and then Karan is like, "Okay, maybe there's something more." And the neighbor says, "I want more soup," right? Which is complete, like, what the hell? So I'm a little bugged with that ad, because I'm like, why not end it with this denial? For how long should queer people just be these simpering people waiting for, like, something more, but then given soup? Why don't you end an ad with ambiguity? Give us queer viewers a chance. What happens next? Stop at Karan and, like, leave it open, right? So I just went into this rage on Twitter. And this is a bit of it, right? I wonder who the ad is directed towards. Queer people? I'm certainly not going to buy any Nor soup after seeing this. Straight people? If so, is featuring a queer character for mere comic relief the only way to advertise to them? A queer character whose desires are thwarted in the end? How is this progressive? Twitter ka zamana hai, so I tweeted about my discomfort and watched the comments flow back and forth. There were 2 comments from media friends I particularly mulled over. Anindita Ghosh, the editor of Mint Lounge, tweeted to me, "Quite like the ad. Radical in the sense that Karan is in it today and wouldn't have been in it even 5 years ago. Actually, the unhappy ending builds empathy and helps audiences identify with a queer protagonist. I think it's less othering." Anuradha Sengupta, the consulting editor for CNBC TV 18, tweeted that the ad was simply piggybacking on changed social realities. It's not a PSA. The ad is not aiming to mainstream queer folk. It's using them like it would use straight people to sell, in this case, soup. I showed the ad to my partner when he came home from office. He laughed and said he found it cute. When I told him about my discomfort, he replied, "At least it's there." "But how much of "at least it's there" will our community take?" I retorted, and tweeted back to Anindita and Anurag. I was reminded of Mona's crumbs analogy. I don't want crumbs, yaar. Still, both Anuradha and Anindita are liberal, LGBTQ friendly feminists and staunch allies. And my partner is, well, my partner. So I wondered, was I overreacting? And like the 3 of them, should I also interpret the Nor ad as progress? Now I'm going to close. What happens next? You have to read the book.
Okay, Angad, I think we are going to now hand it over to you. So feel free to bring in the questions for Parmesh.
Sure. Another great conversation, by the way. Thank you so much, both of you. Just you guys kind of went, because you obviously are so passionate about the issue, you went slightly over the times, but let me try and squeeze in a few questions from our members. So one of our members asks, Parmesh, this is for you. You mentioned something about a lack of information out there. There seems to be a genuine gap here. Where does this information, understanding of the queer community begin? Can it be done in schools? Do you think it should be done in schools? What are your views on this?
So that's a great question. And I think it has to, in an ideal world, we would be talking in our homes. We would be talking in our educational institutions. We would be talking at our workplaces, right? And it's not just about so many things. We don't talk to our children about love, about respect, about so many things, right? So in an ideal world, it would begin at home with their parents. And I'm so blessed that I have so many friends who have begun these conversations with their children, who are talking and their children know, that their parents are like, mommy and daddy, but they have friends who are 2 uncles, and they have other friends who might be 2 aunties. And in their world, it's very normal. Right? So a lot of people are having these conversations at home. There's incredible progressive schools which are out there right now. Tagore International in Delhi is one of them. I'm very happy Their students have started a club called Breaking Barriers. And this is 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, which is an LGBTQ club. And they invite people from across the LGBTQ spectrum to give talks, plays, performances. It's a sensitization club. Like Tagore International, there are so many other schools which are coming up across the country. There are colleges like TIS, which have gender-neutral hostels, like TIS in Mumbai, which is great, right? Because if you don't identify any gender or you just want to be in a gender-neutral space, they have an hostel. And on their certificates, instead of Mr. or MS, you can get MX. So a lot of these things are happening at school and college level. But I think it really starts with home. We need to have these conversations at home. One of the chapters in my book is called, it's a reversal of, the Karan Johar tagline of Kabhi Khushi Kabhi Gum. It's all about loving your parents. And one of the chapters in my book is called, it's all about loving your children. Because I think it starts at home. These conversations start at home. Because a lot of them don't start at home, as I discussed earlier with Anuradha, they need to happen at the workplace. But I would say, start at home. And actually, there's a whole bunch of things you can read about being LGBTQ in India. There are more than 200 books right now, all the way from history to mythology. Devdutt has great books like Shikhandi. There are great films out there, documentaries and otherwise. So there's actually a lot of stuff. I mean, the Keshav and Lalit group of hotels has started a children's book series called Elfie. And Elfie is this rainbow elephant, and who talks about how all children are different and all children should be loved and things like that. There's actually a lot of resources out there. So I would say use them and start.
All right. Another question, and personally, I want to ask this because if you want to motivate anybody in our country, I mean, money is the best way to do it. So, like you mentioned that the LGBT community is a big market. Could you explain how does one actually? You said ki aake le lo, and who wants it? So how does one actually do that? Like, what needs to be done for people to actually do that?
So very good. I'm glad that you motivated me. Thank you for sending me a big fat check for doing this for the Quorum Club, because nothing motivates one like money. I'm waiting for the hamper for sure. Huh? Anuradha, you also know they're sending you a big hamper. Now, to answer your question, I think to get the trust and respect of your LGBTQ employees and customers, you have to walk the talk. So you have to have policies in place. You have to hire queer people. You have to engage with the queer community. And if you do all of that, you will realize to your surprise that queer people are supporting you, working with you, buying your products, becoming your advocates. So there's enough case studies, say Subaru in the US, and I use that as a case study in my book, right? A Subaru as a car decided that it wanted to specifically go after the lesbian market. And it did a range of things, right? It did advertising, which was nudge, nudge, wink, wink. It supported LGBTQ issues. It partnered with something called the Rainbow Card. It used queer icons in their advertising as role models. Essentially, over a bunch of years, it indicated to the queer community that it respected it. It was serious about their business. And you know what? Even when the auto market in the US went into a downturn, Subaru did not suffer as much because they had the love and affection of their loyal queer consumer base. In India, the Lalit group of hotels does the same. I mean, I can choose to stay at any hotel that I want when I travel anywhere in the country. Why do I always choose the Lalit when there is a Lalit? Because the Lalit has employed more than 100 LGBTQ queer people, and these are often at various intersections. Some of their employees are queer and disabled. One of them is queer and an acid attack survivor. Someone else is, so I mean, that's the thing. It walks the talk. And because it walks the talk, me as a queer consumer would love to give them my pink rupees. So anyone wants to target the queer market, it is a market, but you will have to make the effort of walking the talk. If you just think you can put a rainbow filter on Pride and then sell to me, I will see through your inauthenticity. But if you, over the long term, can create a relationship with me, then you reach this phase of being a love mark, not just a trademark or a brand, right? Which will inspire loyalty beyond reason. So the way to earn the trust of queer customers is the same as the way you would earn the trust of other customers. Be genuine and authentic and be in it for the long term.
Understood, Parmesh. Thank you. All right.
I like how he didn't mention any hamper.
We might send you one. We don't.
No, one. I'll tell you one. I love dark chocolate. Just send me one lovely piece of dark chocolate. That will be it.
So do I actually.
That's something we can definitely do.
One piece, but size doesn't matter. One piece.
Like that. This one's for you, Anuradha. So how can we get the media to start covering this subject more? I'm sure most people will agree that fighting for gay rights is a far more important issue than the whole Sushant Singh Rajput saga, is what a member asks.
So how do we get I'm not going to take that bait, okay? So I'm not going to bite the bait, but I'm going to answer the question. What happens in news television is when the countdown to the verdict, the day of the verdict, all these become big tentpole events around which you do programming, okay? But you need to do programming, you need to do coverage, you need to have reportage on a consistent basis through conversations, through reports. This is not about me, but I have attempted to do that in some of the work we did. In fact, Parmesh talks about job fairs, which are being held and hosted directly, having companies to, where LGBTQ youngsters can come and look for jobs, and companies are actually looking to hire them directly. So I got this covered. We had this reported, but these stories are not sexy. These are stories that are as ordinary as the ordinary human beings' rights-based stories, rights that are denied, rights that are that need to be ensured. These stories are not sexy until something big happens, unless there's a big achievement or a big scandal. We've got to keep at it. Why news channels don't do it, I don't know. We should do it regularly. Maybe somebody will. Maybe we'll have to do it on forums like on fora like Quorum. But we've got to keep at it. And I think the COVID-19 experience has shown us that you don't need to rely on mainstream media, especially mainstream television news channels anymore. You can get what they're giving you, through independent journalistic outfits and a whole bunch of other organizations that are putting out ideas and content. So maybe that's the route to take. But any commercially oriented news organization will see value, in sensationalism, which seems to be working in today's day and age, in today's time, as we have seen with Sushant Singh Rajput's story. So is that good? Is that bad? No, obviously it's awful. I feel a bit embarrassed to say that my entire career has been based in news television, but I also know what it can do. I know the conversation with Wendell that I've done, with Duti Chand, with Devdutt, with Anjali Gopalan of Naz Foundation. You hear these conversations, they're there. I dare you to go and hear these conversations, because frankly, let me tell you, stop pissing on news channels, because you watch them, you see them, you make up your mind based on them. So, you deserve it. You want to get the other stuff, it's there. Just look for it. I'm not going to be apologetic for news channels, even though they are rotten, many of them.
All right. So this one, I think we can close with this one for you, Parmesh. And I think might be a difficult one to answer, but where do you think India per se stands in terms of gay rights, the government's openness towards the gay community, an open-minded approach towards actually wanting to make a change, but with respect to the world, like not just the West, but the other regions in the world, like the Middle East, etc. Like, where do you think India stands?
I think they're certainly better than so many other parts of the world, for sure. We've had, these 3 verdicts in the past few years have given us a much stronger legal ground, for sure, right? Whether it's a NALSA for transgender rights, right to privacy, and 377 going away. So I think there's no question in terms of where we stand in terms of just on legal grounds, we are in a better place than so many of our neighboring countries, so many other parts of the world, and so many parts of the world again where like Russia, for example, where there's been regress, right? After years of progress, it's kind of gone back over there as well. I think with any kind of movement towards justice, it's a long-term process. And where we stand in terms of our rights, in terms of the law and on paper, is only one small thing compared to the daily acts of either violence or injustice. And on the other side as well, kindness and love and inclusion, which are happening in our country on a daily basis, which shapes queer lives and queer experiences in our country as well, right? So I think where we stand in terms of our rights, I mean, we're okay. Would it be great to be where the Scandinavian countries are, for example, in terms of equal rights for everything? Sure. But, maybe those rights, we will have to get in a different context using different arguments for us in India. But what I want to move towards is where we stand in terms of our practice, in terms of, and which is why I wrote this book, right? How do you influence people's hearts and minds? How do we get people to just interact differently in our homes, in our institutions like colleges, in our workplaces, to understand the importance of inclusion? Because we need to translate the rights that the law gives us into real life experiences. And that only comes from the long, hard work of daily practice, the long, hard work of daily sensitization, the kind of advocacy that happens through cinema, through every television show, through every conversation. It comes through allyship from all the allies out there, which have understood that LGBTQ rights are not just something that LGBTQ people should be struggling for, but they're deeply linked to other rights, right? So I'm interested in seeing in that progress, because I think once society changes, then you move up these rankings very quickly. And Sir Ian McKellen told me this. I mean, he's my friend, so I can just call him Ian. But for y'all, he's Sir Ian. And when we were hanging out in Bombay, and I write about this in the book, so you should read it even for that, he just told me about how rapidly things change in the UK. How within a decade, societal change, societal acceptance of LGBTQ issues, it was really, really very rapid, but it built on all the groundwork that was happening for so many decades before. So I see once societal change happens, which is why I'm harping every time that to be inclusive is an Indian value, right? It is Indian to be inclusive. It is in our Indian culture to be inclusive. The British were homophobic. They brought 377. They went away 70 years ago. 377 went away in 2018. It's time to send homophobia somewhere else. It doesn't belong in our country. I think if we can use this to change our homes, our families, and our workplaces, we can create a society in which inclusion can become the norm, and then we can move up all these global indexes.
I think that's a great way to end this amazing conversation. I'd like to thank you, Parmesh. I'd like to thank you, Anuradha. Thank you for and everybody who tuned in today to watch both of them discuss a very vital issue. And please buy Parmesh's book, Queeristan. Like if this conversation is if anything, like that book has so much more in it. So please do buy the book. All right, guys. Thank you so much. I think that does it for us today.
Bye.
Right. Thank you. Thanks, Anuradha. This is
and guys, Parmesh is a show-off. He talked about Ian McKellen, but Parmesh used to talk about going swimming with Bill Gates. I think that's going to hook all the HR managers you want to reach out to, okay? So,
buy the book.
Guys, thank you very much. Lovely conversation, Parmesh. Good luck with the book.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.